Why does the absence of thought, emotion, or stimulation often feel disturbing rather than peaceful? This question highlights a paradox at the center of modern experience. When external noise fades and internal commentary quiets, many people do not experience clarity or relief. Instead, they report boredom, discomfort, or a vague sense that something is missing. Stillness is commonly equated with lack, inactivity, or emptiness. This assumption creates a contradiction. Silence should reduce mental load, yet it frequently produces unease. Moments without stimulation trigger restlessness rather than understanding. Mental quiet is interpreted as a loss of meaning, or even a temporary loss of identity. If thinking slows down, the sense of self appears threatened. This lecture explores an alternative explanation. What is labeled emptiness may not be empty at all. It may be a misinterpretation of cognitive stillness. Ibn Arabi offers a precise insight into this confusion. He argues that stillness is not absence, but a different mode of presence. This is not spiritual escapism or emotional mysticism. It is a careful analysis of perception, attention, and awareness. From a psychological standpoint, modern humans display a strong aversion to low stimulation states. Daily life is structured around constant input, notifications, media, conversation, and task switching. Over time, this produces a dependency on stimulation. When input decreases, anxiety often increases. Several mechanisms help explain this. Attention addiction describes a learned reliance on continuous novelty to sustain engagement. Default mode network, or DMN, overactivity leads to rumination when external input drops. Without distraction, the mind turns inward and generates repetitive self-referential thought. Uncertainty. Intolerance amplifies discomfort when there is no clear mental narrative to follow. These processes manifest in observable behaviors. People compulsively scroll through content without clear purpose. Silence produces restlessness rather than rest. Periods where nothing is happening are experienced as threatening. Neurologically, this makes sense. The brain equates reduced stimulation with loss of predictive control. When prediction weakens, anxiety rises. The core limitation is this: cognitive systems mistake reduced activity for absence of meaning. A different framework is needed, one that distinguishes true emptiness from perceptual stillness. Ibn Arabi is often described in poetic or mystical terms, but this description obscures his analytical depth. He was a philosopher of consciousness and perception, deeply concerned with how reality is experienced rather than how it is imagined. His work consistently examines presence, awareness, and the structure of knowing. Importantly, he did not advocate emotional numbness or mental blankness. He did not suggest withdrawing from thought or suppressing cognition. His position is more precise. Reality, according to Ibn Arabi, remains fully present even when perception becomes quiet. What changes is not reality itself, but the interpretive activity of the mind. His key claim is that stillness represents a perceptual threshold, rather than a void. When habitual cognitive processes pause, awareness does not disappear, it reorganizes historically. This analysis predates, but closely anticipates, modern work in phenomenology and consciousness research. Ibn Arabi provides a conceptual language for understanding stillness not as loss, but as a shift in how presence is registered. central distinction in Ibn Arabi's thought is between the absence of mental activity and the absence of reality. These two are often conflated when thinking slows. It is assumed that nothing remains. Ibn Arabi rejects this assumption. Stillness occurs when interpretive filters pause. The mind temporarily stops labeling, evaluating, and narrating experience. From a cognitive perspective, this resembles sensory adaptation and reduced narrative processing when constant interpretation ceases. Awareness does not vanish. Instead, it becomes non-conceptual. A simple example clarifies this. After prolonged exposure to loud sound, silence can feel overwhelming or empty. This sensation does not indicate a lack of auditory input. It reflects contrast. The nervous system has adapted to stimulation and momentarily struggles to recalibrate. The same principle applies internally. When mental noise decreases, the mind may register this as emptiness because it expects constant content. The error lies in assuming that interpretation equals presence. Ibn Arabi's insight is that the mind mistakes the lack of interpretation for the lack of content. Stillness is not absence, it is saturation beyond conceptual. Labeling. To explain how awareness functions beyond conceptual thinking, Ibn Arabi uses the term heart in his framework. The heart is not the seat of emotion. It is a faculty of direct awareness capable of integrating experience without analysis. Thought categorizes. It divides experience into objects, meanings, and judgments. The heart, by contrast, integrates. It receives without fragmenting. From a neuroscientific perspective, this aligns with theories such as global workspace theory, which propose that consciousness involves integration across distributed processes rather than isolated modules. Consider moments of immediate recognition. A familiar face is recognized before verbal reasoning occurs. A situation is understood as significant without explicit explanation. These are examples of meaning arising without articulation. A common misconception is that stillness involves dissociation or disengagement. Ibn Arabi explicitly rejects this. Stillness does not remove awareness, it removes excess mediation. Meaning can be present without being. Translated into language. The heart, in this sense, functions as a receiver beyond thought. Ibn Arabi's concept of sukun is often translated as tranquility, but this translation can be misleading. Analytically, sukun refers to the reduction of internal signal interference. It is not emotional, flattening, or passivity. Psychologically, sukun corresponds to effective emotional regulation and the deactivation of compulsive evaluation processes. When the mind stops constantly assessing, comparing, and predicting, awareness stabilizes. An important clarification is necessary here. Calm does not mean boredom. Boredom arises from understimulation combined with expectation. Calm arises when expectation drops in sukun. Awareness remains alert without being driven. This distinction matters because many people abandon stillness prematurely, assuming it offers nothing. Ibn Arabi's insight is that mental noise obscures coherence. When noise reduces, underlying structure becomes accessible. Sukoon reveals order, not emptiness. To further clarify this transition, Ibn Arabi introduces Barzakh. an intermediate threshold between presence and absence. Barzakh is not a place, but an experiential state where awareness shifts from conceptual meaning to direct perception in cognitive science. This resembles threshold consciousness or pre-verbal awareness states. These occur during deep focus, absorption, or moments just before conceptualization resumes. For example, during intense concentration, awareness may be vivid while internal dialogue is minimal. Afterwards, it may be difficult to describe what occurred, even though it was clearly experienced. What feels empty in these moments is often a transitional cognitive state. The mind has not yet re-engaged its interpretive machinery. Ibn Arabi treats this state not as loss, but as a gateway, allows awareness to exist without immediately collapsing into narrative. Ibn Arabi explains discomfort with stillness through identity attachment. Much of modern identity is tied to mental activity, thinking, reacting, remembering, planning. When these processes slow, the sense of self appears destabilized. Psychologically, this can feel like ego disruption. There may be fear of non-narrated awareness, where the self is not actively defined. This fear is often misinterpreted as danger. A critical clarification follows. Stillness does not erase identity. It suspends habitual self-description. The loss of noise is not the loss of self. It is the temporary absence of commentary. Discomfort in stillness signals perceptual reorganization, not threat. The system is adjusting to a different mode of awareness. Ibn Arabi reframes this discomfort as informational rather than pathological. Applied practically, Ibn Arabi's framework suggests subtle but significant cognitive shifts. One shift is learning to observe stillness without labeling it as positive or negative. Another is reducing compulsive meaning-making when nothing demands. Interpretation. From a neuroscientific perspective, this approach reduces DMN, hyperactivity, and improves attentional stability. Studies on mindfulness and attentional training show similar effects. Though Ibn Arabi's model predates these findings by centuries, these insights apply directly to stress management, focus training, and existential anxiety. For example, sitting in silence without task orientation, without expecting insight or calm, allows awareness to stabilize naturally. The result is increased psychological resilience. Stillness becomes informative rather than threatening. Clarity emerges not from effort, but from reduced interference. The central insight of this lecture is simple but often overlooked. What feels empty is often full beyond interpretation. Stillness is not absence, it is undivided presence. When thought quiets, meaning does not disappear, it becomes conceptual. The mistake lies in assuming that awareness only exists where language operates. Ibn Arabi offers a disciplined framework for recognizing stillness as cognitive depth rather than loss. His analysis aligns closely with modern psychology and neuroscience. Even as it remains rooted in metaphysical clarity, stillness does not require withdrawal from life. It requires a correction of perception. When this correction occurs, what was once feared as emptiness reveals itself as presence without noise.